The flash of lightning tore through the darkened sky as Bethany Jamison clutched the edges of her bed, her knuckles white with strain. This wasn't how she had imagined bringing her child into the world alone in a ramshackle cabin while a prairie storm raged outside, her husband 6 months dead and buried beneath the harsh Wyoming soil. "Come on, little one," she whispered through gritted teeth, her nightdress damp with sweat despite the cool April evening. The year was 1876, and Park City was still nothing more than a collection of wooden structures clinging to existence in the shadow of the mountains. Another contraction seized her and Bethany bit back a scream. The midwife who had promised to attend the birth was stranded on the other side of town, unable to brave the flooded creek that now separated them. She was truly alone, or so she thought until a sharp knock sounded at her door. "Mrs. Jamison," a deep voice called out. "It's Ethan Grant. Saw your light from the trail. Everything all right in there?" Bethany tried to call back, but another pain overwhelmed her, and all that emerged was a strangled cry. The door burst open, and there stood the tall figure of Ethan Grant, soaked to the bone, his hat dripping onto her floor. Ethan worked as a ranch hand at the neighboring property, and while they'd exchanged pleasantries at church and the general store, they were hardly more than acquaintances. His eyes widened as he took in her condition. "I'll ride for the doctor," he said, already turning. "No time," Bethany gasped, reaching out a hand. "The baby's coming now." Ethan froze, clearly torn between fleeing for help and staying. For a moment, Bethany thought he might bolt, and who could blame him? This wasn't a burden a stranger should bear, but then his jaw set firmly and he removed his drenched coat. "I've delivered foals and calves," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Reckon the principle can't be too different." Under different circumstances, Bethany might have laughed at his attempt to sound confident. Instead, she managed a weak nod. The next hour passed in a blur of pain and exertion. Ethan moved with surprising gentleness for a man who spent his days wrestling cattle. He brought water, spoke in low, reassuring tones, and when the moment came, coached her through each push with steady determination. Just as the baby's cry filled the room, the loudest clap of thunder yet shook the cabin to its foundation. Rain lashed against the windows as Ethan caught the infant in his calloused hands. "It's a boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the squalling infant in a clean towel. "A strong, healthy boy." Carefully, he placed the child in Bethany's trembling arms. As she gazed into her son's face for the first time, Ethan leaned close, his voice barely audible above the storm. "He'll know strength from the start," the cowboy whispered, a hint of awe in his tone. "Born in the heart of a thunderstorm with nothing but his mama's courage to guide him." Tears mixed with sweat on Bethany's cheeks as she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered back. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along. Just happened to be in the right place," Ethan replied, his usual gruffness returning as he straightened up. "What will you call him?" Bethany looked down at her son, watching as his tiny fist punched the air. "Samuel," she decided. "Samuel James Jamison, after my father and my husband." Ethan nodded approvingly. "A good, strong name for a boy born in thunder." That night, after ensuring mother and child were settled, Ethan slept on a chair by the door, unwilling to leave them unprotected during the storm. By morning's light, he helped Bethany tidy the cabin before reluctantly preparing to depart. "I'll send Mrs. Wilson from town to help you," he said, settling his hat on his head. "And I'll check on you in a few days if that's all right." Bethany, cradling Samuel against her chest, felt a flutter of something unexpected in her heart. "We'd like that very much, Mr. Grant." Ethan's promised visit turned into regular stops at the Jamison homestead. At first, he came with the excuse of repairs, fixing the leaking roof, mending the broken corral, chopping enough firewood to last through summer and well into fall. But as spring blossomed into summer, those pretexts grew thinner. "You don't need to keep coming by," Bethany said one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. Samuel, now 3 months old, slept peacefully in a basket at her feet. Ethan stilled, a flash of uncertainty crossing his weathered face. "Would you prefer I stop?" "No," she admitted, surprising herself with her candor, "but I worry I'm taking you from your other responsibilities." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Nothing more important than seeing how this little thundercloud is growing." As if on cue, Samuel stirred, and Bethany lifted him into her arms. The baby immediately turned his head at the sound of Ethan's voice, tiny fists waving. "See," Ethan said, offering his finger for Samuel to grasp. "He's getting stronger every day, just like I said he would." Bethany watched the tenderness with which this hardened cowboy interacted with her son. James had been gone just over 9 months now, taken by a fever that had swept through Park City. The grief still visited her in quiet moments, but it was changing shape, making room for new feelings she wasn't yet ready to name. "How are your supplies holding up?" Ethan asked, changing the subject. "We're managing," Bethany replied, though the truth was more precarious. James had left her with some savings, but they were dwindling rapidly, and with Samuel to care for, taking in laundry or sewing the usual widow's work was nearly impossible. Ethan seemed to read her thoughts. "The Hendersons are looking for someone to help with the books at their mercantile," he said carefully. "I mentioned you might be interested." Bethany stared at him. "You did what?" "Mrs. Henderson said she'd be happy to let you bring the baby along." Ethan shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I overstepped." "No," Bethany said after a moment. "It's just why would you do that for us?" Ethan's eyes met hers and something unspoken passed between them. "Because you deserve a chance, both of you." 2 days later, Bethany stood nervously outside Henderson's general store, Samuel bundled against her chest. To her surprise, the arrangement worked better than she could have hoped. Mrs. Henderson doted on Samuel while Bethany balanced ledgers and organized inventory, skills she'd learned helping her father's small business back in Missouri. Summer turned to fall, and with her new income, Bethany was able to make modest improvements to her home. Ethan continued his visits, though now he often brought Samuel small carved toys, a wooden horse, a tiny bear, figures that displayed a surprising artistry from hands more accustomed to ropes and reins. One crisp October evening, as Bethany rocked Samuel to sleep, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, his expression unusually serious. "I'm leaving at week's end," he announced without preamble. Taking a position with a cattle drive heading south to Texas, Bethany felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. For how long? Months, likely. "Maybe till spring." He twisted his hat in his hands. "The pay is good, better than what I make here." "I see." Bethany fought to keep her voice steady. "Well, we wish you safe travels then." Ethan took a step closer. "Beth, he stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I've been saving. This drive will set me up proper. When I return, I hope to buy some land of my own." Hope flared in Bethany's chest, but she tamped it down. "That's a fine ambition, Ethan. You'll make a good rancher." His eyes searched her face. "I'm not saying this right. What I mean is," he took a deep breath, "I care for you, Beth. For you and Samuel both. I know it's too soon to speak of such things with your grief still fresh, but I wanted you to know my intentions are honorable." Bethany's heart hammered against her ribs. "Ethan, don't answer now," he said quickly. "Just know I'll be thinking of you both every day I'm gone, and when I return." He trailed off, leaving the rest unspoken. The day of Ethan's departure dawned clear and cold. Bethany stood at the edge of town. Samuel bundled warmly against the November chill and watched as the cattle drive assembled. Ethan spotted them and rode over, dismounting to stand before them one last time. "You didn't have to come," he said softly. "We wanted to wish you safe travels," Bethany replied. Ethan reached out and touched Samuel's cheek gently. The baby, now 7 months old, grabbed his finger with surprising strength, gurgling happily. "Look after your mama," Ethan told him seriously, as if the infant could understand. Then he straightened and met Bethany's gaze. "I'll write when I can. We'll be here," she promised. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, but instead he simply squeezed her hand before mounting his horse and riding back to the herd. Bethany watched until the dust from the cattle drive disappeared over the horizon. Then she turned and walked back to town, her heart heavy yet somehow lighter than it had been in months. Winter descended on Park City with a vengeance. Snow piled high against Bethany's cabin, and winds howled through the cracks despite Ethan's repairs. But inside, the home remained warm, both from the carefully tended fire and from the love Bethany poured into caring for her growing son. Letters arrived sporadically from Ethan Brief, unpolished accounts of the drive's progress, the challenges of the trail, and always, inevitably, questions about Samuel's development and Bethany's well-being. She treasured each one, reading them by lamplight after Samuel had fallen asleep. "Your cowboy friend must be quite something," Mrs. Henderson remarked one day as Bethany tucked away his latest letter. "Your whole face changes when you receive his correspondence." Bethany felt her cheeks warm. "He's been kind to us, that's all." Mrs. Henderson murmured knowingly. "Kind enough to ride 1,000 miles with the promise of nothing but the chance to see you again." As winter slowly relinquished its grip on Wyoming, rumors reached Park City of trouble along the cattle route's bandits, disputes with farmers over grazing rights, even skirmishes with tribes protecting their hunting grounds. Each whisper sent fear coursing through Bethany's veins, and when 2 weeks passed with no letter from Ethan, she began to imagine the worst. Samuel's first birthday arrived in April, celebrated with a small cake Mrs. Henderson helped bake and a gathering of the few friends Bethany had made in town. The boy was walking now, unsteady but determined, his dark curls and bright eyes reminiscent of his father, but with a stubborn set to his jaw that was entirely his own. As they celebrated, a thunderstorm rolled in, not unlike the one that had accompanied Samuel's birth. The coincidence wasn't lost on Bethany, who found herself standing at the window, searching the rain-swept road for a familiar figure. "Mama," Samuel called, tottering toward her with arms outstretched. It was a new word joined recently by no and more in his growing vocabulary. Bethany scooped him up, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Yes, my brave boy, Mama's here." That night, after their guests had departed and Samuel slept soundly in his crib, Bethany sat alone by the fire, unfolding Ethan's letters and reading them again by the flickering light. In one, dated from February, he'd written, "I've seen grand vistas that take a man's breath away, but none compare to the sight of you holding Samuel that first night, storm raging outside while new life began within. I carry that picture with me always." Tears blurred her vision as she carefully refolded the letter. In the 9 months since James's death, she had moved from raw grief to a dull ache, and now to something else, a space where memory resided alongside hope for the future. A future she increasingly couldn't imagine without Ethan in it. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Heart pounding, she rushed to answer it, only to find Sheriff Miller standing there, hat in hand. "Evening, Mrs. Jamison," he said. "Sorry to disturb you so late." "Sheriff," she acknowledged, dread pooling in her stomach. "What brings you here?" "Just delivered a telegram to town. Thought you'd want to know straight away." He held out a folded piece of paper. "Cattle drive's been delayed by flooding. They're holed up near Cheyenne. Relief washed over her. They're safe then, seems so." The wire mentioned Grant specifically said he'd been injured but was recovering well. The sheriff's eyes were kind. "Figured you'd want to know that part especially. Injured." Bethany's fingers tightened on the telegram. "Did it say how badly?" "No details, madam, just that he was on the mend." After the sheriff departed, Bethany stood in the doorway for a long while, watching the rain and wondering what "injured" might mean in a land where men often rode for days with broken bones rather than admit weakness. May brought warming breezes and wildflowers to the Wyoming prairie, but no further word from Ethan or the cattle drive. Bethany threw herself into her work at the mercantile and the care of her thriving son, trying to suppress the worry that gnawed at her constantly. One afternoon, as she tallied inventory in the back room of Henderson's store, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway. "Bethany, dear," she said, her expression unreadable, "I believe someone's here to see you." Bethany's heart leapt. "Ethan, best come see for yourself." Smoothing her skirt, Bethany hurried to the front of the store, where Samuel was contentedly stacking wooden blocks under Mrs. Wilson's watchful eye. The bell above the door jingled as a customer entered, momentarily blocking the sunlight. And there he stood, Ethan Grant, thinner than she remembered, a fresh scar cutting across his left cheek, but unmistakably, wonderfully alive. For a moment neither spoke. Then Samuel looked up, saw the familiar face, and let out a delighted squeal. "Ta!" he exclaimed, a near approximation of the name he'd heard his mother speak so often. The sound broke the spell. Ethan crouched down, arms outstretched, as Samuel toddled toward him with surprising speed. The cowboy caught him, swinging him up with a laugh that held a note of wonder. "Look at you, Thundercloud," Ethan marveled. Walking and talking already, Bethany couldn't move, couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Ethan stood, Samuel balanced on his hip, and finally met her gaze. "You're back," she managed at last. "Promised I would be," he replied simply. There was so much she wanted to say, so many questions about his journey, his injury, his plans. But not here, not with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Wilson watching them with barely concealed interest. "When you're settled," she said carefully, "perhaps you could call at the house." Samuel would like that. A smile tugged at Ethan's mouth. "Just Samuel," color rose in her cheeks. "I'd like it too." That evening, after Bethany had served a simple supper and put Samuel to bed, she and Ethan sat on the porch, watching as fireflies began to appear in the gathering dusk. "The scar?" she asked finally, gesturing to his cheek. "Stampede," he explained. "Got caught between a frightened steer and a tree. Could have been worse. The sheriff said you were injured. Broke my leg, cracked a few ribs." He shrugged as if it were nothing. "Laid me up for weeks." "That's why we were delayed." Bethany shuddered, imagining the pain he must have endured. "I was worried when your letters stopped." "Couldn't write much with my dominant arm in a sling," Ethan admitted, "but I thought of you both every day. Asked the other men to describe the sunsets so I could picture you watching them here." The simple admission touched her deeply. "And now, did you achieve what you set out to do?" Ethan nodded, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folded document. 20 acres just north of town. Good water, decent grazing, not much, but it's a start. Your own ranch," Bethany smiled, genuinely happy for him. "Just as you planned." "Almost as I planned," Ethan corrected, his eyes intent on her face. "There's still one piece missing." Bethany's breath caught as he moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I know it's been just a year since James passed," he said softly. "And I'd understand if you need more time, but I love you, Beth. I think I have since that stormy night when Samuel came into the world. I love that boy too, like he was my own blood." Tears pricked behind Bethany's eyes. "Ethan, let me finish," he pressed on. "I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife. Not right away if you're not ready. I can court you proper, give you time to be sure. But I want you to know that's my intention, to build a life with you and Samuel, to give you both the security and happiness you deserve." For a long moment, Bethany was silent, her thoughts tumbling over one another. She had loved James deeply, had mourned him truly. But in these months of Ethan's steadfast presence, then his absence, something new had grown in her heart, a love different from what she had known before, but no less real for its differences. "Samuel already thinks the world of you," she said finally, "and so do I." Hope dawned in Ethan's eyes. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, Bethany leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a gesture that spoke more clearly than words could have. When they parted, Ethan's smile was brighter than the emerging stars above them. "I'll take that as a maybe," he teased gently. Bethany laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Take it as a yes, Ethan Grant. Yes, I'll be your wife." They married in July beneath the sprawling cottonwood tree beside the new house Ethan had built on his land. Samuel, resplendent in a tiny suit Mrs. Henderson had sewn for the occasion, toddled down the aisle ahead of his mother, scattering wildflower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. "Never thought I'd see the day Ethan Grant settled down," the preacher commented as the vows were exchanged. "Must be some powerful magic you worked on him, Mrs. Jamison." "It was Samuel who worked the magic," Bethany replied softly. "Ethan was there when he came into the world. They've been bonded ever since." The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with music provided by local fiddle players and a feast contributed by neighboring ranches. As twilight descended, Ethan swept Bethany into a dance, their first as husband and wife. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "More than I thought possible again," she admitted. Later, after their guests had departed and Samuel slept peacefully in his new room, Ethan took Bethany's hand and led her onto the porch of their home. A summer storm was building on the horizon, lightning occasionally illuminating the distant mountains. "Reminds me of the night we met," Bethany observed, leaning against his solid warmth. "Best night of my life," Ethan replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "Though today might have surpassed it." Thunder rumbled closer now, and Bethany thought of her son, born amidst nature's fury, and how that storm had brought Ethan to her door when she needed him most. "Samuel will have brothers and sisters to grow up with," Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. "This house won't be quiet for long." The promise warmed her heart. "I'd like that very much." As if on cue, a cry came from within the house. Samuel, perhaps awakened by the thunder. Before Bethany could move, Ethan squeezed her hand. "I'll go," he said. "You rest a moment." Through the open window, she heard him enter Samuel's room, heard her son's frightened whimpers subside as Ethan lifted him from his crib. "That's just thunder, little man," Ethan's voice drifted out to her. "Nothing to fear from it. Remember what I told you. You were born in a storm. That thunder is part of your story. It gave you strength from the very start." Bethany closed her eyes, overcome with gratitude for this man who had stepped into their lives and embraced them both so completely, who had seen not burdens but blessings in a widow and her fatherless child. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Ethan's small ranch began to prosper under his diligent care, while Bethany continued to work part-time at the mercantile, bringing Samuel along until he was old enough to help Ethan with the lighter ranch chores. In the spring of 1878, as Samuel approached his second birthday, Bethany discovered she was expecting their first child together. Ethan's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for: pure, unbridled joy, followed by tender concern for her well-being. "We'll need to expand the house," he said, mind immediately turning to practical matters. "There's time," Bethany assured him, laughing at his eagerness. "The baby won't be here until fall." October brought crisp air, golden aspen leaves, and the arrival of their daughter, Elizabeth Rose Grant, born on a clear, star-filled night with much less drama than her older brother. Samuel, now a chatty, curious 2-year-old, approached his new sister with solemn wonder. "Baby?" he asked, peering into the bundle in his mother's arms. "Your sister," Bethany confirmed. "You're a big brother now." Samuel considered this new responsibility with all the seriousness a toddler could muster. Then he patted the baby's head gently, just as he had seen Ethan do. "She born in thunder too?" "No, little man," Ethan answered, crouching beside him. "Your sister chose a peaceful night to join us, but that doesn't mean she won't be just as strong in her own way." As Elizabeth grew from infant to toddler, it became clear that Ethan's prediction was accurate. Where Samuel was boisterous and bold, Elizabeth was thoughtful and determined, approaching challenges with a quiet persistence that often achieved more than her brother's headlong charges. More children followed: twins Joshua and Jacob in 1880, and finally another daughter, Marie, in 1883. Their home expanded along with their family, with Ethan adding rooms as needed and eventually building a larger house when the first became too cramped. The ranch prospered too, growing from 20 acres to over 100, with cattle that were known throughout the territory for their quality. Ethan hired hands to help with the increased workload, though he still insisted on doing much of the labor himself, returning home each evening tired but satisfied with the day's accomplishments. Through it all, Samuel maintained a special bond with his stepfather. As he grew into adolescence, it was Ethan he sought out for advice, Ethan whose approval meant the most to him. Though he knew the story of his birth father Bethany had made sure of that, it was Ethan who taught him to ride, to rope, to face life's challenges with courage and integrity. "You're good with him," Bethany observed one evening as they watched 15-year-old Samuel practice roping from horseback, his siblings cheering him on from the fence. "He makes it easy," Ethan replied, pride evident in his voice. "Got his mother's heart and his own brand of courage. Remember how I told him he was born knowing strength? Wasn't wrong about that." In 1891, as Park City grew from frontier outpost to proper town, complete with a school, church, and even plans for a railway connection, Samuel announced his intention to attend the university in Denver. "I want to study agricultural science," he explained over supper. "Learn modern methods we can apply to the ranch." Ethan's face registered surprise, then unmistakable pleasure. "You're planning to come back then? I thought you might want to strike out on your own." Samuel looked genuinely puzzled. "This is my home. Why would I want to be anywhere else?" Later, after the younger children had gone to bed, Bethany found Ethan on the porch, gazing up at a night sky brilliant with stars. "You're pleased about Samuel's decision," she said, settling beside him. "More than I can say," Ethan admitted. "Always feared the day might come when he'd resent me for stepping into his father's place." Bethany took his hand, the same hand that had once caught her son as he entered the world. "You never tried to replace James in Samuel's heart," she said softly. "You simply created your own place there. That's why he loves you so dearly." The night before Samuel was to depart for Denver, a thunderstorm rolled across the prairie, lightning splitting the sky and thunder shaking the windows of their home. Ethan found him on the porch, watching the spectacle with quiet appreciation. "Still not afraid of storms, I see," Ethan remarked, joining him. "How could I be?" Samuel replied with a smile. "You always told me they were part of my story." Ethan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Your mother was the bravest person I'd ever met that night," he said. "Bringing you into the world alone until fate put me on that trail." "I've always been glad it was you," Samuel said simply. "I couldn't have asked for a better father." The word father, spoken so naturally, without qualifier or hesitation, struck Ethan like a physical blow. In all their years together, Samuel had called him Pa or Ethan, but never directly acknowledged the true nature of their relationship in such plain terms. "You've been my son in every way that matters," Ethan managed, voice rough with emotion. "From the moment you drew your first breath." Samuel nodded, understanding the depth of feeling behind the words. "I know the story by heart, born while thunder rolled, and you whispered I'd no strength from the start." He smiled. "Whenever things get difficult, I hear those words in my mind. They've never failed to give me courage." As thunder crashed overhead and rain cascaded from the eaves, Ethan embraced the young man who had, through no tie of blood but every bond of love, become his son. And he thought of that stormy night 15 years earlier, when a lonely, frightened widow had welcomed him into her home, and how that single act of trust had changed 3 lives forever. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm's passage leaving the world washed clean. As the family gathered to see Samuel off, Bethany stood beside Ethan. Their younger children clustered around them and watched their eldest son mount his horse for the journey that would begin his adult life. "Remember what I taught you," Ethan called as Samuel prepared to ride out. "Which part?" Samuel called back with a grin. "You taught me a lot." "The important stuff," Ethan replied. "Be honest, work hard, and never forget where you come from." "I won't forget," Samuel promised, his gaze taking in his family the mother who had brought him into the world with nothing but her own strength to rely on, the man who had become his father in every way that mattered, and the siblings who looked up to him with admiration and love. As they watched him ride toward the horizon, Bethany slipped her hand into Ethan's, feeling the familiar calluses against her palm. "We did good," she said softly. Ethan's arm circled her waist, drawing her close as their younger children raced back to the house, already planning their day's adventures. "No," he corrected gently. "You did good, Beth. I just had the good fortune to be passing by at the right moment." Bethany shook her head, thinking of all the moments that had led them here: a thunderstorm, a chance encounter, a baby's first cry, and the whispered words of a cowboy who had seen strength where others might have seen only vulnerability. "We were meant to find each other," she said with certainty. "All of us." And as they turned back toward the home they had built together, love evident in every board and beam, Bethany knew it was true. Their story had begun in thunder and challenge, but it had blossomed into something beautiful: a family forged not only by blood but by choice, by courage, and by the kind of love that grows stronger with each passing season.